Um, I will get our evening started. My name is Katie, and I am from Chevalier's Books. We are Los Angeles's oldest independent bookstore, celebrating our 81st year this year. And we are excited to have you all joining us virtually from wherever you are. The beauty of virtual events, you don't have to be in LA to be with us this evening. I have just a couple pieces of business to share with everyone before we get going. Um, the first is that we are recording this evening. So when the time comes for Q&A, you will be able to unmute and ask questions, but if you don't want to be recorded, that's totally fine. You can also put questions in the chat at that time and I'll read them off. That also means this will be available later on our YouTube page. So if you want to watch it again, or you know somebody who wanted to make it this evening but couldn't, I'm aware that it is 10 p.m. for anyone joining us from New York. So it may be too late in the evening, but you will have a chance to watch it and share it with people you know. So we have that going on. Let's see. We also have the book available to purchase. Uh, yep, my colleague Cyan just put the link in the chat. Emily is coming in the store later this week to sign copies. So you can order this evening and she will sign it to you if you so desire, if you order it from us there in the chat. And then let's see, ordering the book, recording, Q&A. I think that's the main thing for us this evening. I am excited to pass the baton to Chevalier's brand new event coordinator, Cyan, who gets to do intros on our Zoom events for the very first time this evening. So please welcome silently, because you're all muted, Cyan.
Awesome. I feel like I have got such a good pair here for my first event. Like this book is just it's so nice to have both of y'all here for my first event. I feel so honored. So I am happy to introduce you to you, the wonderful author today, Emily Bryce Isler, Emily Barth Isler. Emily lives in Los Angeles right now with her husband and two kids, and they actually just moved recently during a really big time. So congratulations to them. She was a BA in film studies and really, really loves television. In addition to her books, Emily also writes about sustainable, eco-friendly beauty and skincare, something that we definitely need right now. And has also written web sitcoms, parenting columns, and personal essays. So that is our author, Emily, today. With Emily, we also have Paige Davis, who is going to be discussing her book, Aftermath. Paige is best known, as you probably know, as the effervescent host of the groundbreaking Emmy-nominated design reality TV show Trading Spaces. She was also the host of Own's Home Made Simple, for which she was nominated for a 2013 Daytime Emmy for Outstanding Host in a Lifestyle and Travel Program, as you can see from her beautiful smile. Yeah, so today we're going to be doing like a Q&A after, as my wonderful employer told you today. So, but if you have questions like along the way, feel free to put the questions into the chat, just like if you remember them. They might be answered along the way, but it's nice to kind of like have those compiled as we go along. So I want to thank y'all for joining us tonight, and I'll pass it off to Emily and Paige to delve into Aftermath.
Hello, everybody. I actually see familiar names and faces. Hello, Mike Stickle. Hello, Mom. Hello, husband of Emily. And I assume Mom maybe of Emily. I'm seeing some Isler last names here. Welcome to all of you. The first thing I have to say before anything else is, Emily, I loved this book.
Thank you.
I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. I was relatively inconsolable, but in a good way, in a very good way, because of course the book has such an uplifting ending and such deep, wonderful meaning. And I just, oh my gosh, I just cried and cried and cried. And It started right when Dad calls the family meeting. That's when the tears came, and they did not end.
Well, thank you.
It was just wonderful.
I've been working hard on not apologizing for writing a book that's, hard or
Makes
sad.
people cry.
Yes, because I know we need those books. I know this is a topic we need to talk about, but I'm actually working on an essay. I'm writing a lot of think pieces and essays about things related to the book at this point. And one of the things I'm writing is an essay called Sorry, Not Sorry, that I wrote a sad book,
Well, it is actually a very uplifting book. And for anybody who is signed on to this Zoom, who is unaware of what we're talking about, the topic of this book is quite important. It's also very poignant. It addresses gun violence in America primarily, and we see it through the eyes of this adolescent girl, Lucy, who is also simultaneously dealing with the loss of her younger brother from heart problems that he had since birth. So it's like a collision of two experiences of loss, and how her loss is coming together with the loss of all these students at a school where there was a mass shooting. So that's what we're talking about. This is why we're crying reading it, in case any of you haven't read it yet. And spoiler alert, it does end with a very hopeful note, on a very hopeful note. But again, for those who haven't read it yet, just a brief synopsis, because I imagine a lot of people have, but tell us a little bit more about the book and what it's about.
Well, as you said, the book follows Lucy, who's 12. And I was really interested in the idea of an outsider's perspective into this issue of gun violence, because I personally, thank goodness, have not experienced it firsthand. A lot of people asked when I was trying to sell the book, is any of this based on your experience? And it is certainly.
Well, I did want to ask, did you lose a sibling?
No.
Because that was also your ability to capture Lucy's feelings about that, and her parents' feelings about that was, I just assumed. It was the first question. I just needed to know that.
No, I have one sibling, and she's still very much with us. Thank goodness. She's my best friend. And I have two kids, and I, just spend a lot of time thinking about sibling relationships and how important that is, because my sister is so important to me, and my husband has a brother, and my kids have each other, and was just sort of able to tap into the what if, which I think, a lot of writing this book came for me out of leaning into my fears, leaning into the things that scared me. I've written a couple of other books that haven't yet been published, but I didn't do this on purpose, but I started to notice my books are generally about things that scare me. And it's sort of a way of dealing with it for me. Because as a kid, reading books or consuming art, was always a way to deal with hard things. And so I think I just sort of translated that into writing about it. I took some things that are my deepest, darkest fears and shine some light on them, and really dove in instead of just sort of shoving it down, as I think a lot of us are taught to do just in society. I really wanted to take the opposite tack, and then sort of took the opposite tack with my characters too. Of, Lucy meets these kids at school who have all survived a school shooting 4 years earlier. And they all have that in common, but they all also, for the most part, have adopted a way of dealing with it that's very open. They talk about therapy like it's, just, everybody goes. And that part I think is great. I would love for my kids to grow up in a world where everyone goes to therapy and it's very normal and it's not something people have to hide talking about in any way. But for this particular cohort of students, they've all been through it together, and they're all dealing in different ways. And it's created an environment where they're all really open about their trauma. And then Lucy walks into this in a brand new school and is confronted with all of these people who, she's the first student who's ever come to this school since the shooting, but it's been 4 years. And I think the other students are all trying to figure out, how is this going to work? They've all been through this thing, and she doesn't know anything about it. And so a lot of them decide to share where they were and who they lost and what their experience was. And it obviously is very jarring to her. But I really wanted to write it from the perspective of somebody who was an outsider, because I'm an outsider to that experience, and because I hope for the majority, our readers are outsiders to that experience.
We do hope that a majority of the
I really hope.
And watching Lucy surf that, you know, to watch her try to well, surf the pain of all these students who are around her, all the while believing and feeling and thinking that she has to hide her own pain because it's too different from their pain.
Exactly. And
her brother died of an illness, not of, you know, a shooter.
Right. And she had a chance to say goodbye. She saw it coming. I mean, she saw it coming for years and years, which is its own kind of pain. And that's a whole other, you know, kind of trauma. But it's really as different as can be, you know. And I think the contrast of that was a really good fit for her love of math. For any of you who haven't read the book, Lucy is a math whiz or a math genius. And she loves math, and that's how her brain works. And it was really important to me in writing the book to sort of ride the line between math being a hobby for her and a coping mechanism.
You wrote that line beautifully. It's quite obvious that she loves math, that she adores it. It's her favorite subject, but that she turns to math for comfort, it's a way of having concrete solutions, you know.
Right,
math
there's a right answer.
Yeah, there's a right answer in this kind of nebulous world that doesn't make sense, and there's no right answer. And she doesn't know how to be with her parents, she doesn't know how to be with her friends, she doesn't know how to be in this new school, she doesn't know how to be with all these emotions inside of her, and math is her grounding nature and force.
Right. And up until the beginning
so
of the book, for her, math is this, you know, there's an end to it too. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and an end. And there's a very obvious, you know, when you're done, you've gotten the correct answer, or if you've gotten the wrong answer, you keep trying until you get the correct answer, and then you're finished.
Unless it's infinity. But we will talk about that. I'm sure it will naturally come up.
Yes.
That is so powerful, and the end of the book is like, just stop now. You know, one of the things I really loved about the book, just as a compliment to me, it was very Judy Blume-esque, and as good as any Judy Blume book I'd ever read. And I loved how you captured adolescence, and I don't know what it says about me that, like, I hardly ever read, but this book I loved, like, but I guess inside of me, I do sort of have this connection to adolescence that way. And I liked that it was an easy read, and I, like, you know what I mean? And it's a great read for younger kids. It's such a way in for them. I love how you capture the awkwardness of adolescence and the fears of adolescence and the obsession and the worrying that have nothing to do with your brother dying, by the way, or have nothing to do with the school shooting.
Well, that was
all of that. I mean, you capture that so well. But I know that it was really important to you that this book not just be a novel for preteens, but that it be something people could really use in the classroom, or that parents could use at home to help open the channels of discussion about grief and loss, and of course, obviously, gun violence.
Right. I think there's obviously a lot to unpack here. And I really envisioned that this would be a book. This is not the book that you hand your kid and say, oh, go read this and, you know, see you later. And, you know, don't worry about it. This is obviously a book that I think families should plan to read together, or if not together, at least having had read separately and be available to talk about. And
there are even, there's like talking points and questions at the end as well.
There are at the end. And then also my editor, Amy Fitzgerald, who's here. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Amy.
She and I worked on also a study guide. There's lots of stuff, math stuff and non-math stuff for teachers to do with kids. It's our hope that, you know, teachers will find this as a tool for talking to kids too. And parents, but so there's an additional study guide that's not in the book, and
I think it will help, you know, just in terms of how I connected to the book. I mean, I am an adult. It's arguable, but I am an adult, and I think that this book would really help adults connect to their grief as well. The way you're able to, even through Lucy's eyes, her empathy is able to give us a real understanding of what the parents are going through. Not just her own parents, but even parents of the kids who lost parents who lost children in the shooting.
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to sort of explore all of the different angles of it without obviously there was a point where I toyed with the idea of writing from a bunch of different perspectives and telling this story, chapter by different characters inside perspectives. And I even, I wrote a couple sample chapters from other characters' point of views, but I just felt really strongly that this was Lucy's story and she was our really, really perfect guide for it. Like I said, she's an outsider to the school shooting situation. She's also an unusually observant kid. And it's so funny. People always say like, oh, I would, most 12-year-olds are not like that. It's like, yeah, nobody wants to read a book of, of a non-observant 12-year-old. I don't know. Maybe they don't.
I think people don't give 12-year-olds credit. I mean, I love how just the small moments you mention of how, the children are listening when the parents don't know they can hear. And, kids know everything. We learn this. We learn it over and over and over again. And kids are sponges and they see everything. They hear everything. And the more we try to keep them from being able to talk about what is so obviously right in front of everyone's noses, the more it suppresses everything. I love your need to end the stigma of therapy. I love that the book is really pro families talking together. And it shows that journey of how they come together and manage how to do that. It's not going to be as easy in a lot of families as it was in Lucy's.
Of course.
But I think, having this positive role model example in this book is really powerful.
And I think that's a good point. I, obviously read a lot of middle grade books and a lot of YA books. And I think there are all sorts of different examples out there. And thank goodness, I think one of the beautiful things about books is you can always find, if you're struggling with something, you can find a character who's also struggling with that, or you can find yourself in a character, and that's amazing. I think some books bring us visions of really great parenting. Some books bring us really flawed grown-ups. And it was important to me that even as Lucy's parents were struggling, because they certainly do, they come out really well in the end, I think, or they're at least trying. But along the way, I wanted there to be at least one adult in her life who was doing a good job. That's all very subjective, but who was really
awesome. He's awesome sauce. If he were real and on the market, I would leave my husband and marry him.
Well, I mean, he is an amalgam of two teachers I had, so I don't know.
Yes, I know that he is an amalgam of those two teachers. So tell us about them and how they influenced you.
Well, I've spent a lot of time, given my own personal experience, thinking about the benefit a good teacher can do and the damage a not good teacher can do, because I unfortunately had that experience too. And I think as bad as the experience I had was with a teacher who was not supportive and not kind and all of those things, it really brought into focus for me the things that an amazing teacher or just a teacher who cares and who's listening can do for a kid. But also, I really want kids to read this and know that those adults are out there. Maybe it's not a teacher, maybe it's not a parent, but to know that if you're struggling, there are adults out there who get it, who are cool, who want to talk to you, who want to listen. That was really important to me. I've read some books, that rightly show that sometimes adults just don't get it, and that really stinks. And I think it's probably true a lot of the time, but I wanted to write aspirationally so that kids were looking for those grown-ups, as sort of a message to be like, those people are out there, go find them.
Find them.
Keep talking to one until you get one that is what you need. And so the character in the story is named Mr. Jackson, and he's super awesome. And he was inspired by two teachers I had. One is my high school math teacher, Mr. Ebersol, who is now a Maryland state representative, which I think is super cool. He went from teaching to now legislating, and it's very inspiring. And he's the one who taught us.
What did he teach?
He taught math. He taught calculus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he taught the infinity math that I reference in the book. And I did at one point email him and be like, is this right? Am I doing, like, is this the correct math that we're talking about here? And so he taught that, but he also was a teacher who a lot of kids, myself included, always felt like was available if anybody needed to talk. And he taught some really important things, like he was the first person to say to all of us, you know, please don't say like, oh, I'm not a math person. You wouldn't say, oh, I'm not an English person. I'm not a reading person. So why do people say I'm not a math person? You know, and that, you know, if it doesn't make sense to you, you're just still, you're on the journey, but don't say you're not a math person. So that was when I really started embracing me being a math person, which I totally am.
I love that there's a book out there of a girl protagonist who's a math person. I think that's really
totally
cool too.
Yeah. And Mr. Ebersol would also sometimes play the guitar for us if we finished our lesson early. And I really appreciated, for me at that time in my life, looked at things very sort of black and white. And so I really appreciated the idea that you could be a math person and also an artsy person, because I sort of thought at the time you had to pick. So that was a great example. And then the other teacher who Mr. Jackson is based on is my middle school gifted and talented teacher, Mr. Terry Sullivan, who was such a huge part of my middle school life, in that to this day, I will tell people that middle school were the best 3 years of my school life, which most people generally cannot quite wrap their heads around. And, you know, maybe I just sort of peaked early, like middle school was great for me. But, you know, I think a lot of it had to do with Mr. Sullivan. And he encouraged me. I was a child actor and sort of came into middle school with this very strong sense of my own identity. And I was done. I knew who I was and I had it all figured out. And, you know, no, thank you. I don't need to try anything new. I've got this. And he was the first person who really said to me, you know, I think you're a writer. I think you should really try, you know, you like acting. Why don't you try writing a play? And I was like, no, I don't do that. I'm the person on the stage. And he was like, no, like you can do both. And so he encouraged me to write a play, which I then got to direct at school, and we produced it. And he also encouraged me to, you know, be behind the scenes sometimes, you know, try all the different roles in theater, really opened my eyes in that. And more importantly, he led a mime class, which is another funny thing about this
that's
book.
real.
So that's real. That's the only part of this book that is my real experience.
Okay, wait though. Are you? You mentioned your sister. Are you by any chance the cool actress aunt in New York City?
I don't know. I mean, maybe there were.
I mean, I know you live in LA now, but
right, no, but at the time writing the characters has a cool actor aunt in New York City. No, I think she was more modeled after like some people that I know who are the cool aunt in New York City.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone
like,
would ever.
Are you the cool?
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I thought it was just fun to like have a cool aunt in it that, you know.
You can say it's me.
Okay, it's you. It's
I'll be Auntie Mame to all.
Exactly. Right.
I interrupted you though, but sorry about that. But so he really taught mime. The mime classes were wonderful, and I love that was such a wonderful piece of your own life to put in the book as a way of getting these kids to start, especially Lucy, to start realizing her feelings and being able to be open. Like, it's so amazing when all of a sudden she's talking not during a mime, but in that class together, she's suddenly like, I have an idea. And somebody looks at her and says, I didn't know you could talk that much.
Right, exactly. I mean, I really struggled with the mime class at that time. I'd grown up doing musical theater, as you know, and I think as much as this doesn't particularly make sense on the surface, I think it was very easy for me to hide behind singing and dancing. I know it seems like a very outward, performative, for lack of a better word, thing to be doing. But first of all, everything I'd done up until then was scripted. You know, this was before, for those of you who are younger than I am, this is before the day that like kids took improv classes. It wasn't, I mean, maybe they did, but I feel like improv had not spread down to elementary and middle schoolers yet. Right? I don't think that was a thing, or at least it wasn't where I grew up. Yeah. And so everything I'd done up until then was scripted. And singing and dancing felt very comfortable for me. And the idea then of being completely silent and not having a script and not having words to hide behind. And, and in mine, you have no props, you have no costumes, all this stuff that had made me feel really comfortable in front of an audience was all taken away. And that really terrified me and fascinated me, and also was eventually, like it is for Lucy, incredibly freeing.
I want to talk a little bit about a little more about what inspired you to write the book, primarily about grief, of course, but about gun violence. And I did some reading about your grandfather, who was not only a writer, a very famous writer, an editorial writer for the Washington Post. Now, you never met him, but he was a renowned advocate for, common sense gun laws.
Yeah.
He actually enacted a lot of change during the Lyndon B. Johnson administration.
Yeah.
So it's almost as if you're carrying on that legacy.
Well, thank you. I can't imagine anything better than, I hope in some small way I am. Yeah, I mean, I think in a way probably different from a lot of other people. I grew up in a house where we talked about guns and gun violence because of my grandfather. And I wanted to sort of use that idea, that comes up again in the kids who are very open about therapy, who are very open about their trauma. Growing up, it was just a conversation piece. That was one of the things I knew about my grandfather, who I didn't get to meet. That was a huge piece of it. I knew what was important to him. And I think that also, he's a writer. My dad was a writer. I'm a writer. I definitely felt like,
wouldn't you like to be a writer too?
Exactly. I definitely felt not like I had to, but like it was in my DNA, and it was there and it was available to me, which is a gift in and of itself. Nobody ever said to me like, "Oh God, please don't be a writer." That was something that people in our family did, which is really nice. But I think I always was looking for connection to my grandfather, and he's really a bigger part of this book than I even realized in writing it. He, I think, is a lot of what I tapped into for writing about grief. Because it's very interesting. I think I relate to Lucy more than I realized, of this idea of comparing grief. Lucy comes into this school where these kids have witnessed and experienced a huge traumatic kind of grief. And she's had this very long, drawn out, predictable in its own way experience with her brother, where they knew it was coming, they saw it coming, it happened, she got to say goodbye. It was all, just completely opposite. And she finds herself comparing those two things and like, do I have a right to grieve if I didn't experience their kind of grief? And she chooses not to even tell them about her brother, because she just feels like it doesn't compare. And I think through the process of writing this book, I realized that maybe more of it than I thought was about my feelings about my grandfather. I remember growing up having lost him, but since I never knew him, I felt like I didn't really have a right to be sad about it. Like, do you get to miss somebody that you didn't even know? Mm-hmm. Or, if my whole life started without him, then how can I be sad that I never had him? And yet I was. There was this idea of him, and there was certainly, a lot of stories and a lot of connections. And I felt like I was the youngest in my family. I've, got an older sister and older cousins. And, I was the only person who like missed this era. So there was definitely a sense of loss there. And in that way, I related very much to Lucy. And in the comparative way, I felt like, oh, I can't be sad about that, and also, how can you be sad about missing one person when I had all these other wonderful supportive family members? I had another grandfather. I had, wonderful parents and aunts and uncles and cousins and lots of people who loved me. So what right did I have to miss that one person who I never met? Right. So I think that was a part of it about my grandfather, not just that he was an extraordinary person and a really inspiring person, but just he was the person I didn't get to meet. And then the gun part of it, if the, gun control part of it, I just grew up with so much admiration for what he was able to do using the written word. And I think it set such a great example for me of the power of language, of writing, of having a using your voice when you have a platform.
The book is also very much about forgiveness. That's a big part of it. Like listening to you talk, I was kind of even thinking about Lucy forgiving herself for having real grief, and forgiving herself for believing that she had a right to her grief, and to not think of that as a bad thing. But also there's this magnificent, I don't want to give too much away for people who haven't read it, but there's this magnificent friendship with a girl named Avery. And you've become very close friends. You end up sharing a lot about your lives with each other. She's a real refuge for you. And she betrays you.
Right.
And the forgiveness of her is really important. And I read, and that's where that conversation with Mr. Jackson is like, just stop it. Just shut the front door. That's it. You've killed me now. I'm like dead. Mr. Jackson is like a hero forever. Or the amalgamation of your two teachers are amazing. And I thought it was really interesting because I read in some of the press notes about, Yom Kippur and communities coming together to forgive their own transgressions. I thought it was really interesting that tonight would be Rosh Hashanah and we would be talking about this. The good Jews that we are on a Zoom. Right. But I mean, I guess it's maybe not a question. Not about everyone. I guess it's not really a question, but I do think that that's another really powerful part of the book. I just wanted to mention that. That if you can't tap into it with the grief and the loss, it's a really powerful book for preteens to read based on forgiveness. And I just think that that's,
well, thank you for saying,
I think it's so important right now.
It was really important to me also
in our climate today about others. And it really reminded me of, like when you say in the book about, some scars, they might not show, but they're just as real. And it made me think of that kind of almost cliche. You see it on Pinterest, a million, be kind. You never know what someone is going through. And
exactly.
I think it's such a visceral way to teach that lesson to preteens. It's so valuable.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I really wanted to model a really healthy friendship. And that a healthy friendship doesn't mean that there are never arguments or betrayals or problems, right? Because I feel like it often is a very binary division in stories. There's people are good or they're bad, or if they're your friends and they're there for you, and friends might fight, but sometimes it's just a misunderstanding. And I wanted it to be not just a misunderstanding, but really a betrayal. Like there is a real breach of the friendship. Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to show that things can be forgiven, and you get to decide who you forgive and who you don't forgive, because, not to spoil it for anybody, but there is no big, of course, there's no forgiveness of the perpetrator of the school shooting or anything like that. I wanted to make it clear that there are things that we can work through and forgive, and then there are things that people are going to carry with them in other ways. And I'm sure people,
and you can form your own boundaries of what will allow you to forgive. That's another thing.
Some people may find forgiveness even for the biggest things, but that there's a spectrum and there's a range, and it's okay to decide.
There's questions you need to ask, and there's you don't just go okay.
Exactly. Exactly. That forgiveness is
really work through it.
It's not just one thing. It's a case by case basis. It's a how do you feel? It's a the bigger picture. And I hopefully I wanted to model that process for kids and also for people of all ages. Goodness knows it's something I've worked on. We've all worked on various things, and it's really an honor to get to sort of share some of that with people.
I do want to make sure that we have time to answer any questions that we get in the chat. So I do want to kind of shift the conversation just quickly before we run out of time, and I'll probably mention it again right before we end. There's this is another thing I saw in some of the press release stuff, that you quote Rainn Wilson a lot. Mm-hmm. Art is another form of prayer. Mm-hmm. Discuss that a little bit, and how you hope Aftermath will be helpful?
I think I and probably a lot of other writers and artists have spent time thinking about the value of what we do, and is it important, and what are our responsibilities, and this idea of having a voice and having a platform, and what you do with it. And then also sort of from the other side, this very personal thing that is writing. A lot of people, I think, assume the opposite. I used to be an actor. I don't really do that anymore. And a lot of people say, oh, well, now you're a writer. That must be so much easier. You're, like with acting, you have to be out in front, and you're, the very visible presence. And with writing, I mean, I think they're obviously very different forms of art, but with writing, it is a much more personal, to me, experience. And I think you have to be okay with, what you're sharing with the world being shared. And so I feel so lucky to have had good people walk this process with me. My editor Amy is here, and my agent Kari Sutherland is here, and all of these people who helped guide me. But I do think offering art up to the world is a form of prayer, in that it is intimate, and it's whatever we put in the world is sort of what we're adding to it. And I think there's a lot of thought and care that goes into that. What do you want to put into the world? What do you want to put into the consciousness? What do you want to, whether you're writing for kids or not, I think every time you put something into the world, you're teaching people.
Absolutely. And I think, this is a real, it's a book that kids can connect to all these things we were talking about: grief, loss, struggle, friendship, adolescence, just adolescence, period. It's a great book in general. But also hopefully it will inspire some form of activism as well. I know,
Exactly.
that's really important to you. And I hope that we are putting in the chat the different organizations that you've been really supporting through all of this. Anna Grace Project is one of the young girls who died at Sandy Hook. Then, of course, Sandy Hook Promise, and Mom's Demand, which is Mom's Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. All those things. If
and I think what's really important,
want to donate or look into more, that would be great.
Yes, and I what I really love about those three organizations is that they focus on very different aspects of this issue. The Anna Grace Project was started by a parents who lost a child, but the mother happens to be a clinical psychologist, and she really comes at it. They provide support for trauma victims, and for children going through things. And I thought that part of it's really important. And, Moms Demand Action is much more on the sort of legislation preventative, let's get ahead of this problem. There are all these different ways to get involved. And that was important to me to show that to anybody reading this, there are lots of different ways to engage with this subject, and any subject. Kids see so much these days going on in the world that is not great, unfortunately.
I also think it's a really important thing to note about the book, that it captures the spirit and the importance of acknowledging exactly what the title of the book, the aftermath, like what happens when the casseroles are gone from the freezer,
right,
and people aren't coming round anymore, and everyone's back to their normal lives, and yet grief is still washing over a person or a family, or a school, and what that means. And I think that's incredibly valuable. Okay, so these questions, this is interesting. People want to know about you, Miss Emily.
I haven't seen these yet. I'll let you read them.
Miss Nora. She knows that the book is not autobiographical, but she was wondering if you drew on any personal experience when you wrote about the notion of trying to fit in somewhere, especially as a kid, or maybe even hiding a part of yourself in hopes of being accepted. And I'll hold the second one.
That is a great question. And thank you. Nora is one of the members of my writers group, and one of the first people I show anything I write to, and an author herself. Nora and I are going to do a book talk in 2 weeks together because she has a book, Competitive Grieving, that just came out. So we were both writing about grief at the same time, which was,
that's interesting.
was really nice to have a partner in that. You know, it's funny, when I was writing the book, I really thought that it wasn't about me at all. And as I went through this process, I've been working on this book for almost 6 years in some form or another. The early form of it, I wrote in about 3 weeks in 2016, at the very end of 2016. And no, 2015, the very end of 2015. And at the time I thought, you know, really the only thing in there that is remotely about me is the mime class. And I just sort of borrowed that and the math and the, you know, these wonderful teachers and everything. But I did not think that there was a lot of me in the characters. And what I've learned, which I think most writers will probably tell you, most actors who have to step into a character, you know, anybody who's creating art is, in order to make good art, it has to become personal. It has to be something about you. And to me, I think a lot of that happened, you know, I don't know if I didn't want to see it or if I was just absolutely not tapping into how much of it was personal for me. And as I've gone through it over the past 6 years and gone through the different processes of editing and rewriting and editing again, and then now doing press for it and talking about it and writing lots of essays about it and everything, I am constantly finding new ways that I really relate to it, that I relate to Lucy, that I relate to Avery. I never had the experience as a kid of moving to a new place. I was very fortunate to always get to live in the same place and go to school with people I knew. But it's interesting, as a parent, I have been on the other side of it, you know, 2 years ago, moved my kids across the country. And so I think that even the pieces of it that I think are not about my life, or, you know, maybe it's not directly about my life, but there's so much of it that I was able to draw upon. And
people want to know, Nora wants to know, how did you write all this with 2 little kids?
That is my favorite question.
Did you sleep?
I mean, yeah, you know, this book in particular, I wrote in little fits and starts. I wrote this when my son was not even a year old, and my daughter was in preschool for like 2 hours a week total. So it was really about, like, I was just so inspired that whenever I had a second, I would sit down and write a little bit. I think this book taught me that you don't always get the pristine conditions that you think you need as a writer. When you really have something to say, you find the moments and you find these just little pockets of time. I had some amazing babysitters who would come for 2 or 3 hours at a time, you know, once or twice a week. So not big chunks of time. But I really appreciated those times. A lot of writers have asked me, you know, how do you finish anything and not get distracted by the internet or not get, and I always say, you know, pay a babysitter or pay somebody $20 an hour for your writing time, and you will be very efficient.
Yes, that's true. My husband always says, if you want to get something done, declare a date publicly that you're going to present it and put it online, and then you have to do it. It's kind of the same type of idea.
Exactly.
Although I would be scared that I would like hire the babysitter to come over and I'd have this set of hours from 3 until 5 in the afternoon, and I would like, I got nothing. And then when I really needed, I had an idea. The babysitter
those days happen. But I did find, you know, sort of my rule for myself as a writer is, if you don't have anything to write anyway. And good. Sometimes good stuff comes out of that, and sometimes totally unusable stuff comes out of that. But, you know, sometimes that's where.
Well, you brainstorm even off of the unusable. I mean, nothing has to be perfect as soon as it comes out.
Nothing is for nothing.
It's a really important creative lesson. A lot of people don't start the creative process because it isn't perfect from the beginning. And it rarely, if ever, is, you know, so it's really important to get something out and deal with it later.
Right. Like, you just, you know, if you have the time, then that's your writing time, and you got to write something.
What do you consider is the youngest age for someone to read this book? But it's not so much, you know, someone was asking it, Rebecca was asking, it's not just about like the words themselves and, you know, being at a reading level, but in terms of the perspective of the subject matter.
I think that's a great question. And what I can say from my personal experience is it varies from person to person. I think there are a couple different age ranges that have been identified by the publisher. And then when you send a book to the Library of Congress, apparently they designate an age range too that doesn't necessarily line up with that, or, they sort of arbitrarily pick something. And so there are lots of different metrics for what people think is appropriate. But I think the real answer is it depends on the kid. And that's why I encourage parents to read this particular book first. I have a daughter who's 10. And I think 10 is probably the lower end of what I'd say. I'd say for the most part, I think this book is for middle schoolers and up. But you're always going to have your amazingly precocious fourth graders who want to read it, and that's great. My daughter is 10 and hasn't read the book yet. And part of that, I think, is because, anything, if your mom writes it, it's not cool or loaded, or it's just a lot. That's a lot. But I think the other part of that is that she's really good at knowing what she wants to think about and deal with. She got halfway through, I think, the 6th book of Harry Potter and was like, okay, I've had enough. Like, this is as much as I'm going to stop here. Like, I'm done. I don't want to read anymore right now.
I wrote a book, and I'm pretty sure the Library of Congress recommended it for preschoolers. That's my that's my guess. But know your child, and that's really good advice. Read the book first.
Yeah, because I think
it really depends on the kid.
And it's not any material that's going to be brand new. No kid is going to pick this up. Unfortunately, in America, kids have unfortunately confronted a lot of these issues. Kids have active shooters.
Again, the reason you wrote the book. I mean,
right.
One of the main reasons why you were inspired to write the book is because this is a real problem. Exactly.
This is not a surprise to anybody, but I think kids are really wise about what they're ready to really sit with and what they're ready to process. And, I'd say middle school would be my short answer.
Have you gotten any response from educators yet, or is it too soon?
So
Hannah wants to know, what are educators saying?
Oh, well, this has been the most fun part for me. And I'm sorry, Amy and Kari, my editor and agent, cover your ears because I've gone against your advice and I've read all the reviews. Everybody's like, don't read the reviews, especially the online reviews. But what I didn't realize about putting forth a book particularly a book that's geared towards kids and intended for school audiences, is it's made available ahead of time. Kari typed in, no, Emily, not the reviews. I know. It's made available. It's made available in advance, particularly for teachers, librarians, and educators, and also for the press and bloggers and reviewers. That's important.
You sent it to any politicians?
Yeah, actually, a couple. I don't know if they've read it, but
that would be interesting to see.
I know. We'll see. But the response from teachers and librarians has been overwhelmingly positive, which I remind myself on a daily basis. That is the point. I'm really lucky. I've gotten a lot of really lovely reviews from, the official journals and the, whatever, and the press and all of that kind of stuff. But I always am reminding myself, who I wrote this for. I wrote this for kids. It's very easy to get off track and get really wrapped up in what other people think about it and the random reviews on Amazon and the guy on NetGalley who was like, I don't like math. I hated this book. It's like, yeah, well, it was in the title. What were you it says math.
I mean, I'm not a huge fan of math, but I got every joke in the book and I loved it. I thought it was a marvelous way in. I think it's very important to note here too, when we're talking about educators and have you sent it to politicians and all these things, it is a hot button issue. And there are people who feel very strongly on either side of this issue. And one of the things that's most wonderful about the book is that it is not preachy in any way. It just declares that this is something that happened. This happened to these kids, and how are kids dealing with it, with their grief in adolescence. It's not about, it really isn't political in any way. There's not a breath in the book that's like that. It's so much more pure and simple. The feelings are complicated, but it's a very simple story.
Yeah, it was really important to me too that it does not in any way, it barely even covers the shooting itself. It does not glorify violence or sort of rehash any of the stuff that kids just really don't need to think about.
No, it's not about that at all. In fact,
Yeah.
children could be going through any number of different kinds of trauma, and they'll be able to relate to the other kids
Yeah.
going through grief
And
and trauma. This just
I mean,
happens to be the details of these kids.
the timing is really interesting because I think a lot of kids coming back to school this fall after the pandemic, you know, I hope, I mean, it's naive to say, gosh, I hope nobody suffered a personal loss, but we know because of the numbers, tons of people suffered personal losses, and it's tragic and horrible. And there is this feeling right now in society of, oh yeah, like let's all get back to normal. Like people are vaccinated. I mean, you know, anybody who's a parent of kids under 12 will tell you it is not back to normal. We are all still in it because our kids aren't vaccinated. But this
coming out of the bubble is not that easy. I mean, it's just
exactly.
me and Patrick, and I'm sort of like, I don't want to go back into the
Totally.
world. I like our bubble.
It's very strange. And I think we as a society are coming out of systemic trauma. And I'm not even sure most of us are aware of it. And I think this book is horribly, strangely applicable to that and to a lot of situations where like we've all been through this huge trauma. We're all kind of those kids and trying to figure out how to move forward.
Okay, I want to end on a fun note. This
Okay.
we're gonna put your creative mind to the test.
Oh, I'm excited.
I don't know how to pronounce her name. Is it Mylan?
Oh, Mylan, yes.
Mylan. She wants to know, has Mr. Jackson experienced a loss? Lucy never gets to his story, but we see him have such empathy, and we have such empathy for him. I mean, obviously he experienced the loss of the trauma of the school.
I love this question. And I actually explored writing part of this into it, but I felt like I was adding a few too many issues and did not want this to be that book. But I sort of envisioned that Mr. Jackson might be a military vet because I spent a lot of time thinking about survivors of incidents of gun violence in the same category with when I was growing up. I had a lot of friends whose dads mostly had fought in the Vietnam War and had come home dealing with what it's like to be involved in active duty, and was really struck by how our society does really not do a great job of taking care of our veterans. We have the same expectations for them that we now have for survivors of trauma of other kinds, which is you're back. Just, you know, let's get back to normal. Like you're here, yay. And very little sort of reentry into society, very little understanding for what people have been through. That was certainly my experience growing up with the dads of some of my friends. And so I sort of envisioned Mr. Jackson as being a survivor of some kind of trauma in active duty. And you know, really thought about sort of writing about like, oh, maybe he, you know, has an opinion about how he's been treated, and it felt like a little too much.
I vote for the shoot off series of Mr. Jackson.
Yes.
And I would like
I have an
Justin
idea
Timberlake to play the part. And
oh no, you know who's
I want to be the older love interest that he falls. I'm gonna be the cougar that he falls in love with.
You know, the actor William Jackson Harper, who was on The Good Place?
I don't.
Oh my God.
Oh, yes. Oh, I know The Good Place. Wait,
yeah,
which one was he?
Chidi Anagonye. He's Mr. Jackson.
Yeah.
I had already written the book.
I'm still in.
I had already written the book, and then I saw that show and he walked on screen and I was like, that's weird. That's Mr. Jackson. It's so weird. So great. It's already been cast, but you're welcome to come on as any.
Well, I know that it was not about you, but for me, so much of the enjoyment was picturing you as Lucy. I could picture your face. I could picture your buoyancy. I loved imagining that it was you, but you certainly do not have to be friends with Emily Isler or Emily Barth Isler to enjoy.
Well, thank you.
And enjoy this book. I'm so proud of you. I'm so impressed. And I hope everybody buys a copy. I know there's all this information getting put in the chat right now.
Well, and
So
I just
click on
want to
those links and get your copy today.
I just want to thank you, Paige, for doing this with me, because this has been the most fun discussion I've ever had. And, you know, I forgot for a while there were all these other people here. It was just really fun to get to talk to you. And thank you. You asked such really insightful questions. Not that I'm surprised, but it was really, it's fun. I feel like I learn something every time people ask questions about it.
Well, it was my pleasure and my honor. And honestly, I'm forthright. I don't know if I would have read it if you hadn't asked me to do it. Or I probably would have eventually read it, but it was such a gift to read it, and I just devoured it. And my parents can attest, I'm not a reader. I'm not. It's not. I watch TV. That's what I do.
Just like Mr. Ebersol said.
I know. I was thinking that when you said that. I was thinking
there are no non-math people. There are no non-readers.
No, I was thinking that. I'm going to stop languaging that. Yes. You have made me a reader.
Look at that. Magic.
You're my Mr. Jackson or my Mr. Sullivan. That's it.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations to you so much. Yay for Emily. Yay for Chevalier's books. Yay for Learner Publishing. Yay.
Yay. Well, on behalf of Chevalier's, thank you both. You know, it's not like I haven't seen you host things before, Paige, but it was really wonderful to see somebody who is so good at hosting and asking questions. I'm like, oh, right. Yes, there. And that explains the Emmy nominations and the years of work. You were an excellent host and conversation partner. And Emily, it was such a delight and such an honor to get to host this event.
It's a dream.
And thank you to everyone who attended this evening. We appreciate your presence. The link for signed copies is in the chat. If you haven't ordered one yet, please feel free to. And